The weight of the camera in my hands was a familiar comfort, a solid piece of the world I understood. Everything else was borrowed light and fleeting moments. My life was a series of rented tuxedos, polite nods to people whose names I'd forget by morning, and the quiet hum of a battery pack charging in my small apartment. I lived in the margins of other people's celebrations, a ghost with a good lens. It was a solitary existence, but it was ordered. It was safe. Most of the time, that was enough. Tonight, however, felt different. The air in the Vance estate wasn't just conditioned. It was perfumed with the scent of money so old it had turned into something subtle, like leather and rain. Peonies, white as fresh cream, spilled from massive stone urns. A string quartet played something by a composer I didn't know, the notes weaving through the low murmur of conversation like silver thread. This wasn't just another gig. This was the gig. The one that could pay my rent for the next 3 months and put my name on the right people's lists. And it was his house, Julian Vance. His name was a quiet institution in this city, attached to hospital wings, university scholarships, and art foundations. I knew him the way most people did, through newspaper articles and the occasional photograph from events like this one. He was older, maybe early 50s, with a stillness that seemed to command more attention than the loudest man in the room. I'd kept a clipped article once, a feature on his foundation's work with at-risk youth. In the photo, he wasn't smiling for the camera. He was listening to a teenager with an intensity that felt utterly genuine. That photograph was tucked inside a book on my shelf. I never asked myself why. My job was simple. Capture the elegance, the generosity, the carefully curated perfection of the evening. I moved through the crowd, a shadow in black, my lens finding the moments between moments. A shared laugh between 2 women in shimmering gowns. An old man's hand resting on his wife's back. The clink of champagne flutes. I was good at this, at seeing the small human details that made a grand event feel real. Then I saw him. He was standing near the French doors that led to the sprawling gardens, listening to a city councilwoman. He wasn't just listening. He was absorbing her words, his head tilted slightly, a thoughtful line between his brows. He wore a classic tuxedo that fit him with an ease that spoke of custom tailoring, not rentals. His hair was more salt than pepper, cut short and neat. There was a quiet power in his stance, a steadiness that seemed to anchor the entire glittering room. I lifted my camera, the focus ring smooth under my fingers. I framed the shot, catching the way the chandelier light caught the silver at his temples. The councilwoman was animated, gesturing with her hands. Julian remained still, a calm center in her conversational storm. He gave a slight, considered nod, and just for a second, his gaze drifted past her, sweeping the room. His eyes, a deep, quiet gray, met mine through the lens. My breath caught. It was only for a heartbeat. He didn't react, didn't signal that he'd seen me. His focus returned to the woman in front of him. But I felt it. The weight of a gaze that saw not just a camera, but the person behind it. My own camera felt heavier in my hands, suddenly less of a shield. I lowered it, my pulse a little too quick. I took a deep breath and turned away, focusing on a group of donors by the silent auction tables. But the image of his steady, assessing eyes was burned behind my own. For the rest of the evening, I was acutely aware of him. I didn't point my lens in his direction again unless it was necessary, capturing him greeting a major donor or giving the welcome speech. During his speech, his voice was what I'd expected, low, calm, and resonant. It filled the space without needing to be loud. He spoke about community, about shared responsibility, about the simple, profound act of showing up for one another. He wasn't performing. He was just speaking, and everyone listened. I found myself watching his hands. They were capable, with long fingers and clean, short nails. When he adjusted the microphone, the movement was economical and precise. When he gestured to the head of the charity, it was an open, inviting motion. They were the hands of a man who built things, who fixed things, who held things with care. It was an odd detail to fixate on, I knew, but my camera had taught me that hands told stories words often hid. As the night wound down, guests began to depart, their goodbyes echoing softly in the grand foyer. I was packing my gear near a side entrance, carefully placing lenses into their padded slots. The adrenaline of the job was fading, leaving behind the familiar ache in my shoulders and the low-grade hum of loneliness that often followed these events. I was surrounded by connection, but never a part of it. You have a good eye. The voice was quiet, close behind me. I straightened up, turning, and my heart gave a hard thump against my ribs. It was Julian Vance. He was standing alone, his hands in his pockets, the formal line of his jacket softened by the relaxed posture. Up close, the lines around his eyes were more pronounced, etched by time and, I suspected, a great deal of thought. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said, my own voice sounding thinner than I'd have liked. "It was a beautiful event. It's Julian, please," he said. A small, almost tired smile touched his lips. "And the beauty is in the details. You seem to have a talent for finding them." He gestured toward my camera, which was resting on top of my case. "May I?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. He picked it up with a surprising familiarity, his fingers finding the controls easily. He wasn't clumsy with it. He held it with respect. He scrolled through the last few dozen shots on the small display screen, his expression thoughtful. I watched his face, the subtle shifts of his brow, the way his lips pressed together in concentration. He paused on a candid shot of an elderly couple, the woman laughing as her husband whispered something in her ear. "This one," he said, his voice soft. "You captured her joy perfectly. Not just the smile, but the light in her eyes. That's rare. They seemed happy." I managed, feeling foolishly young and inarticulate. He looked up from the camera, and his gray eyes met mine again. This time, there was no lens between us. The gaze was direct, and it held a warmth that took me by surprise. It wasn't pitying or condescending. It was just present. "They are," he confirmed, his voice a low murmur. He handed the camera back to me, his fingers brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. A spark, a tiny jolt of warmth, shot up my arm. It was nothing, a meaningless, accidental touch. But it felt like everything. He looked around the now emptying hall, a flicker of something I couldn't name in his eyes. Satisfaction? Weariness? "The night is preserved," he said, more to himself than to me. Then he turned his full attention back to me. His expression was serious, but not severe. "These are all excellent. But I wonder if you could get one more." I felt a rush of professional panic. Of course. Did I miss someone? A specific group? He shook his head, a faint smile returning. "No. I'd like one with you in it." I stared at him. The request was so far outside the bounds of my professional experience that I couldn't immediately process it. Me? The photographer? We were meant to be invisible. We were the documentarians, not the subject. "Sir?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Julian," he corrected me gently. "I have dozens of photos of myself at these things. Hundreds, probably. I'd like one to remember the person who saw the evening so clearly." He gestured to a quiet corner of the foyer, where an ornate gilt mirror hung against damask wallpaper. Right there. With me, my mind was a blank slate. This wasn't in the contract. It wasn't in any manual for how to be a professional photographer. But the request wasn't a command. It was an invitation, offered in that same low, steady voice that had held a ballroom captive. And I found I couldn't refuse. I couldn't even think of a reason why I would want to. He is asking for something. A piece of the night that isn't for the Foundation's newsletter or the society pages. This is for him. The thought is terrifying and thrilling all at once. Nodding, I fumbled with my camera, setting the timer. My hands felt clumsy, disconnected from my brain. Julian waited patiently, his stillness a stark contrast to my internal chaos. I propped the camera on a marble-topped console table, framing the shot in the reflection of the mirror. I moved to stand beside him. The space between us was charged. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something with sandalwood and maybe a hint of citrus. He was taller than I'd realized, and I felt suddenly small next to his quiet presence. "All right," he asked, his voice a low rumble next to my ear. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on our reflections in the mirror. We looked like an impossible pairing. Him, in his perfectly tailored suit, the picture of wealth and established grace. Me, in my slightly too large rented tux, my hair probably a mess, my expression a mixture of shock, and something else I couldn't dare to name. The camera's timer light blinked. Red, insistent. 3, 2, 1. Just before the shutter clicked, Julian did something that sent a tremor through my entire body. He rested his hand lightly on my lower back. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't even familiar. It was a simple, grounding touch. A quiet act of inclusion. Of connection. The The flash went off, bleaching the world white for an instant. In that brief, bright moment, I felt seen. Truly seen. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like a ghost at all. The days that followed were a return to my normal, quiet rhythm, but something had shifted. The memory of that brief moment, the warmth of his hand on my back, played on a loop in my mind. I edited the photos from the gala with meticulous care, my focus sharper than ever. Every frame of Julian Vance felt charged with a new significance. I saw the tiredness he tried to hide, the genuine warmth in his smile when he greeted an old friend, the weight of responsibility in his posture. I felt like I was being given a key to a room I was never meant to enter. I delivered the final digital gallery via a secure link, along with a formal, professionally worded invoice. I included the photo of the two of us at the very end, labeling it simply archive. I debated for an hour whether to include it at all, my finger hovering over the delete key. It felt too personal, too much like a confession. But it was what he had asked for. Denying the request now felt like a retreat, a step back into the shadows. So I sent it. For 3 days, there was silence. I told myself it was normal. He was a busy man. His foundation would process the invoice, and a check would arrive in a few weeks. The personal moment was just that, a moment. A fleeting whim of a wealthy man at the end of a long night. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. But the hollow ache in my chest told a different story. On the 4th day, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was simply J. Vance. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't from his assistant or his foundation's accounting department. It was from him. The email was brief, direct. Leo, the photographs are extraordinary. You have a remarkable gift. I would like to discuss them with you in person, specifically regarding the selection for the Foundation's annual report. Would you be available to stop by my office tomorrow afternoon? Around 3? Julian. It was a perfectly professional request. Logical, even. And yet, every word felt loaded with unspoken meaning. My office. Not the Foundation's. Not a public cafe. And the signature, Julian. It was an invitation back into that space of quiet connection we had briefly shared. I typed and deleted my reply 3 times before settling on a simple, yes, that works for me. Thank you. I hit send before I could second-guess myself again. His office was in a restored heritage building downtown, the kind with a quiet, marble-floored lobby and a discreet brass plaque next to the elevator. The whole building felt like him, solid, understated, and built to last. His personal office was on the top floor. His assistant, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, greeted me by name and led me through a calm, art-filled reception area to a large wooden door. She knocked once, then opened it for me. Mr. Hart is here, Julian. Julian was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city, a phone to his ear. He turned as I entered, and a small smile touched his lips. He gestured for me to come in, finishing his call with a few quiet, decisive words. I'll handle it. Thank you. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, giving me his full attention. Leo, thank you for coming, he said, his voice as calm and low as I remembered. He crossed the room, his hand extended. I shook it, and his grip was firm and warm. The brief contact sent that same familiar jolt through my system. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. Thank you for the opportunity. His office was not what I expected. It wasn't a sterile corporate suite. It was more like a library or a study. Bookshelves lined 2 walls from floor to ceiling, crammed with books on history, art, and economics. A large, worn leather sofa sat opposite a simple, elegant desk made of dark wood. The space felt lived in, personal. It smelled of old paper and brewed coffee. Please, he said, gesturing to a pair of comfortable armchairs near a low table. Can I get you anything? Coffee. Water. Water would be great. Thank you. He poured it himself from a glass pitcher on a side table, the movements unhurried and graceful. He handed me the glass, our fingers brushing again. This time, I was ready for it, but the little shock of warmth was just as potent. He sat in the chair opposite me, not behind his imposing desk. We were equals in this space, the arrangement seemed to say. As I said in my email, he began, leaning forward slightly. The photos are exceptional. Better than we've ever had. He paused, his gray eyes holding mine. You see things. Not just what's there, but the feeling behind it. I just try to capture what I see. I said, feeling a blush creep up my neck. Praise from him felt different, heavier, more meaningful. "Well, what you see is quite remarkable." He gestured to a large monitor on a nearby credenza. "I took the liberty of flagging a few dozen for the report, but I wanted your opinion. You were there. You felt the rhythm of the evening. For the next hour, we went through the photographs. It was a shared experience, a quiet collaboration." He would point to a photo and say, "I like the composition here," and I would explain the choice of lighting or the f-stop I'd used. He listened with that same focused intensity I'd seen at the gala. He wasn't just nodding along. He was genuinely interested. He asked thoughtful questions about my process, about my equipment, about how I started in photography. The conversation drifted from the technical to the personal with a natural ease. I found myself telling him about my first camera, a cheap film camera I'd bought with money from a summer job. I told him about the magic of the darkroom, of watching an image slowly appear on a blank sheet of paper. I hadn't talked about this with anyone in years. But with Julian, it felt easy. It felt safe. He, in turn, shared a little about himself. He pointed to a small, framed black and white photo on his desk. It showed a younger man who looked like him, standing proudly next to a simple, hand-built wooden boat. "My father," Julian said, his voice softening. "He was a carpenter. He believed in building things that would last. Foundations. Not just with wood, but in life." It was a small window into his world, a glimpse of the man who existed before the name Vance became an institution. It was a moment of vulnerability, a quiet offering of trust. I felt the careful walls I had built around myself begin to crack. We finished selecting the photos for the report. There was a natural pause in the conversation. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, filling the room with a warm, golden light. I should have been packing up, preparing to leave. But I didn't move. Neither did he. "There's one more photo," he said, his voice dropping a little lower. "The one from the end of the night." My breath hitched. "The one in the mirror." "Yes," he said. He looked at me, his expression unreadable but intense. "I wanted to thank you for including it. And I wanted to apologize if my request made you uncomfortable. It was unorthodox." "It didn't," I said, the words coming out faster than I intended. "It was unexpected, but not uncomfortable." He held my gaze, and I felt as though he were looking right through my carefully constructed professional facade. "Good," he said softly. He leaned back in his chair, a long, slow movement. I find myself, at this stage in my life, less interested in the orthodox. The air in the room grew thick with things unsaid. This was no longer about photographs. We had crossed a line, and we both knew it. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of weight and possibility. It felt like the moment before a storm breaks, or the deep breath before a plunge into cold water. Then, he asked a question that felt like an open door, not a test. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle but direct, "why do you hide behind the camera?" The question landed in the center of my chest, a direct hit. No one had ever asked me that. Most people just assumed I was shy, or artistic, or simply doing my job. But Julian saw the truth of it. It was a hiding place, a way to be present but not participating. Safe. I took a breath, the truth rising to my lips before I could stop it. "It's easier to watch," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "There's less risk." A look of profound understanding crossed his face. "I know something about risk," he said quietly. "And I've learned that the greatest risks often come with the greatest rewards." He paused, and his next words were chosen with deliberate care. "And sometimes, the risk is simply in asking for what you want." He let the words hang in the air between us. An offering, a challenge, an invitation. He was telling me about himself, but he was also asking me a question. A silent, terrifying, wonderful question. My heart is a drum against my ribs. What do I want? I want to stop hiding. I want to step out from behind the lens. I want to know the warmth of that hand on my back again, not by accident, not for a photograph, but for real. I want this. I want him. The silence hummed. I knew this was a tipping point. I could retreat, make a polite excuse, and walk out of his office, back into my safe, ordered, lonely life. Or I could take the risk he was so gently offering. I met his gaze, my own fears warring with a desperate, burgeoning hope. "What is it you want, Julian?" I asked, my voice shaking just a little. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and making them shine. "I'm looking at it," he said softly. The foundation of my carefully ordered world didn't just crack. It dissolved into dust. A week later, another email arrived. This one was different. It was a formal offer, not from Julian, but from the director of his foundation. They were launching a new initiative, a year-long project documenting the stories of the community programs they funded. They wanted to hire a dedicated photographer to create a visual archive, a book, and a gallery exhibition at the end of the year. They were offering the position to me. The contract was attached. The salary was more than I had made in the last 2 years combined. It was a life-changing opportunity. It was stability. It was respect. It was everything I had ever dreamed of professionally. And it was a gilded cage. My first thought was a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. My second was a cold wave of fear. This would tie me to him. Not personally, but professionally. I would be on his payroll, indirectly. I would be working in his world, on his projects. The clean, simple line that had existed between us, client and contractor, would be gone. I would be his employee. The power imbalance, already a vast chasm, would become a formal, contractual reality. I read the offer 3 times, my hands shaking. It was a dream job. It was also a test. Was this his way of helping me? A grand, generous gesture from a wealthy patron? Or was it something else? A way to keep me close, to bind me to him in a way that felt safe and respectable? I spent the next 2 days in a state of agitated paralysis. I walked the city for hours, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder, but I didn't take a single picture. I saw everything, but I couldn't frame it. My internal lens was focused solely on Julian Vance and the contract that sat, unopened, in my email. I knew I had to see him. I couldn't accept or decline something this significant over an email. I needed to look him in the eye and understand his intentions. I needed to know if he understood what this offer meant, not just for my career, but for us. Whatever us was. I replied to the foundation director, thanking her for the offer and requesting a brief meeting with her and Julian to discuss the scope of the project. It was a professional, appropriate request. Within an hour, his assistant replied, scheduling a meeting for the following afternoon in the foundation's boardroom. Not his personal office. The distinction was not lost on me. I walked into the boardroom feeling like I was walking into an audition. The room was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in comfort of his office. A long, polished table reflected the recessed lighting. The foundation director, Sarah, was already there. She greeted me warmly. A moment later, Julian walked in. He wore a crisp blue shirt, no tie, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He looked more relaxed than he had in a suit, but his presence still filled the room. He smiled at me, a polite, professional smile. There was no trace of the intimacy we had shared in his office. It was like a shutter had closed. "Leo, good to see you," he said, his tone businesslike. "Sarah tells me you have some questions about the project." We sat down, me on one side of the vast table, the two of them on the other. It felt like an interview. We spent 20 minutes discussing the project's goals, the travel requirements, the creative freedom I would have. Sarah did most of the talking. Julian listened, his hands steepled in front of him, his expression thoughtful and remote. He was the benefactor, the man behind the curtain. The distance between us felt immense, geographical. I felt a growing sense of despair. I had misread everything. The moment in his office had been a brief lapse, an illusion of connection. This was reality. He was my potential employer, and I was a photographer he admired. Nothing more. Finally, Sarah paused. "So, do you have any other questions for us, Leo?" This was it. My chance to retreat, to accept the job and the professional distance that came with it, to take the incredible opportunity and bury whatever personal feelings I had. It was the safe choice. The smart choice. I looked at Julian. His eyes met mine across the polished expanse of the table. For a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something behind the professional mask. A question. A hope. It was enough. I took a deep breath. "I do have one," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I turned my attention to him directly. "Julian, this is an amazing opportunity. But I need to be sure the lines are clear." Sarah looked back and forth between us, a flicker of confusion on her face. Julian's expression didn't change, but his gaze intensified. "Go on," he said, his voice quiet. "The work is for the foundation," I said, choosing my words with care. "My contract would be with the foundation. My supervisor would be Sarah. My professional responsibility would be to this project." I paused, letting the words sink in. Is that your understanding as well? It was a loaded question. I was asking for a boundary. I was asking him to acknowledge the unspoken thing between us and to agree to keep it separate from this. I was giving him an out, but I was also demanding clarity. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sarah looked at Julian, waiting for his lead. Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The movement was deliberate, closing some of the distance between us. When he spoke, his voice was low and clear, intended only for me. Yes, he said, that is my understanding. The professional arrangement is exactly as you've described it. It is sacrosanct. He held my gaze, and the warmth was back in his eyes, a low flame in the cool gray. Anything else, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, would be entirely separate. A different conversation, and one that would depend completely on your willingness to have it. He had done it. He had named the subtext. He had acknowledged that anything else and placed all the power, all the agency, squarely in my hands. He had built a wall around the professional offer to make it safe for me, and in the same breath, opened a gate to the personal, leaving the choice to walk through it entirely up to me. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me dizzy washed over me. He understood. He saw the imbalance, and he was actively working to correct it, to create a space where I could choose freely, without pressure or obligation. I looked back at Sarah, who was now watching us with a dawning, gentle understanding. Thank you for the clarification, I said to her, then turned back to Julian. In that case, I would be honored to accept the position later that evening, after the contracts were signed and the professional obligations met. A simple text message appeared on my phone. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was from. Are you willing to have that different conversation? Jay, my heart leaped. My fingers trembled as I typed my reply. Yes. His response came a moment later. My house. Tomorrow. 7. Not as an employee, just as Leo. I arrived at his gate at 7 o'clock on the dot. My old car feeling conspicuously out of place on the quiet, tree-lined lane. I announced myself into the intercom, and the heavy iron gates swung open with a quiet, hydraulic hiss. I drove up the long, winding driveway, the crunch of gravel under my tires the only sound. The house was just as imposing as it had been on the night of the gala, but tonight, with the windows lit with a warm, golden light, it looked less like an estate and more like a home. He opened the door before I had a chance to ring the bell. He wasn't in a suit or a crisp business shirt. He was wearing a simple, soft gray sweater and dark jeans. He looked comfortable. He looked real. The smile on his face was not the polite smile of the host or the CEO. It was just for me. Leo, he said, his voice full of a warmth that wrapped around me like a blanket. I'm so glad you came. Hi, I said, my own voice a little breathless. I stepped inside, and he closed the door behind me, shutting out the rest of the world. The grand foyer was silent without the string quartet and the murmur of 100 guests. It was just us. I thought we could talk in the library, he said, gesturing down a quiet hallway. It's less formal. The library was my vision of heaven. It was the room I had imagined for him, filled with books, comfortable leather chairs, and a fireplace where a low fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air smelled of wood smoke and old paper. He had a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waiting on a low table between the chairs. He poured us both a glass, the red liquid catching the firelight. He handed one to me, his fingers lingering on mine for a moment longer than necessary. The simple touch was a question and an answer all in one. We sat, not opposite each other, but in 2 chairs angled toward the fire. The silence between us was comfortable now, companionable. It was the silence of 2 people who had already said the most important things without speaking a word. I meant what I said today, he began, his voice soft in the quiet room. About the job. It's yours, with no strings. I wanted you to have the stability to do your best work. The work you were meant to do. That's all I know, I said. Thank you, Julian. It means more than you know. I think I might have some idea, he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving my face. But I also have to be honest. My motives weren't entirely selfless. I wanted an excuse to see you again. The confession was so simple, so direct, it took my breath away. You didn't need an excuse, I whispered. You just had to ask. I'm not used to just asking, he admitted, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. In my world, asking often feels like directing. The lines get blurred. I didn't want to do that to you. I wanted you to have a choice, free and clear. He stood up and walked over to the fireplace, resting one arm on the mantelpiece. He looked into the flames, his profile etched in gold and shadow. I've spent my whole life building things, Leo. Companies, foundations, endowments. Things that are meant to last. But my personal life has been a series of temporary structures. I became very good at being alone. He turned to face me, his expression open and serious. And then I saw you at the gala, looking at the world through that lens of yours. And you weren't just seeing the surface. You were seeing the truth of things. The joy, the awkwardness, the quiet connections. And when you looked at me, I felt like you saw me too. The man, not the name. It was unsettling and wonderful. My heart felt too big for my chest. He was giving me the one thing I never expected, the truth. His truth. I stood up and walked to him, closing the space between us until only a few feet remained. The air crackled. The fire popped and hissed. The entire world seemed to be holding its breath. I have to be honest, too, I said, my voice shaking but clear. My interest in you, it isn't just because you're a kind patron. From the first moment I saw your picture in that newspaper article, I felt something, a connection. Seeing you in person only made it stronger. I've spent my whole life feeling invisible, and when you look at me, I feel like I'm the only person in the room. The tension was a physical thing now, a taut wire humming between us. This was the breaking point. This was the moment where everything would either shatter or fuse together into something new and strong. He took a step closer, and another, until he was standing right in front of me, so close I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, so close I could feel the heat from his body. He raised a hand, slowly, as if giving me time to retreat. He gently cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The touch was electric, a current of warmth and tenderness that flowed through my entire being. Leo, he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't dare to name. What do you want? It was the same question he had asked in his office. But this time, I had the answer. I didn't need to speak it. I closed the last inch of space between us and leaned in. His lips were soft, warm, and hesitant at first, a question. I answered by pressing back, a confirmation. The kiss was not a sudden conflagration, but a slow, deep burn. It was a release of all the unspoken words, all the yearning glances, all the pent-up hope. It was a kiss of arrival, a feeling of coming home to a place I had never been before. He wrapped his other arm around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all. I tangled my fingers in the soft fabric of his sweater, holding on as if he were my only anchor in a swirling sea. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. It tasted of wine and wood smoke and a profound, bone-deep relief. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb continued its gentle stroking of my cheek. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against my chest. I was so afraid, he whispered, his voice rough. Afraid I had imagined it all, you didn't. I whispered back, my own voice trembling. It's real. He opened his eyes, and the look in them was one of such raw, unguarded tenderness that it made my own eyes well up. Yes, he said, his voice full of wonder. It is. He kissed me again, a short, soft press of his lips against mine, a seal on a promise. It felt right. It felt unforced. It felt like the beginning of a foundation that was meant to last. The next morning, I woke up in a room I didn't recognize. Sunlight streamed through a gap in heavy, cream-colored curtains, painting a bright stripe across a vast, unfamiliar bed. For a disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then, the scent of coffee and the memory of the night before came rushing back. Julian's house. Julian's bed. I was alone. The space beside me was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. A flicker of the old, familiar panic ignited in my chest. The morning after unease. The fear that the magic of the night would dissolve in the harsh light of day. Had I dreamed it? Had he woken up with regrets? The reality of our differences crashing down on him? The age, the money, the chasm of life experience between us. I sat up, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm. My clothes were folded neatly on a chair in the corner. On the bedside table, a glass of water and a single, perfect white peony in a small crystal vase. It was a thoughtful gesture, but it felt formal, distant. I dressed quickly, the silence of the large house amplifying my anxiety. I crept out of the bedroom and followed the scent of coffee down a wide, sunlit hallway. I found him in the kitchen, a vast, beautiful room of stainless steel and warm wood. He was standing at a large island, his back to me, wearing the same jeans and a simple black t-shirt. He was focused on a French press, his movements as precise and unhurried as ever. He didn't seem to have heard me. I stood in the doorway, suddenly shy, an intruder in his morning routine. The domesticity of the scene felt both incredibly intimate and terrifyingly fragile. I was Leo Hart, a freelance photographer who lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. He was Julian Vance. What were we doing? Good morning, he said, without turning around. His voice was calm, but I thought I detected a new note of caution in it. Morning, I replied, my voice husky. He turned then, a coffee mug in his hand. He looked at me, his expression serious, his eyes searching my face. He didn't smile immediately, and my stomach plummeted. This was it. The polite dismissal. The gentle letdown. Did you sleep well? He asked. It was a simple question, but it felt loaded. I did. I lied, my mind having been a whirlwind of excitement and fear all night. Very well, he nodded slowly, taking a sip of his coffee. He watched me over the rim of the mug, his gray eyes thoughtful. The silence stretched, and my anxiety grew with every passing second. I had to say something, to break the tension. Julian, about last night. I began, but he held up a hand, stopping me. Before we talk about last night, he said, his voice quiet but firm, we need to talk about today. And tomorrow, he set his mug down on the counter with a soft click. Come here, Leo, he gestured to the stool opposite him at the island. I walked over, my legs feeling like lead, and sat down. He didn't move to touch me. He kept a deliberate, respectful distance between us. I am very aware, he began, his gaze direct and unflinching, of how this looks. I am older than you. I am established. And you are now, technically, working for my foundation. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. That is a minefield of potential complications. For you, mostly I was stunned. I had expected him to be worried about his reputation, about what his board members or society friends might think. But his concern was for me. I spent a long time this morning thinking about how to do this right, he continued. How to build this on a foundation of respect, not obligation. How to make sure you never, for 1 second, feel trapped or dependent. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the island. So we need rules. Boundaries. Your work for the foundation is completely separate. You will report to Sarah. You will have your own studio space. I know a place downtown we can rent for the project. Your salary will be paid by the foundation's general account, which I do not personally control. We will not discuss work when we are together. And you will have a key to this house, but I will also have a key to your apartment. We will exist in each other's worlds. As equals, he laid it all out. A practical, thoughtful blueprint for navigating the power imbalance between us. He had seen all my fears, all my insecurities, and he was addressing them head-on, not with romantic platitudes, but with concrete, respectful solutions. He was protecting me. He was protecting us. The knot of anxiety in my chest loosened, replaced by a wave of profound gratitude and affection. He wasn't just a kind man. He was a deeply considerate one. He understood that real intimacy wasn't just about what happened in the dark. It was about how you treated each other in the clear light of day. Okay, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Okay, Julian. That sounds good. Really good. A slow smile finally broke across his face, a sunrise after a long night. The caution in his eyes melted away, replaced by that incredible warmth. Good, he said, the word full of relief. He reached across the island and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His touch was solid, reassuring. Now, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. About last night. It was the best night of my life. Mine too. I whispered, my heart so full I thought it might burst. A few weeks later, we faced our first small test. The foundation was hosting a press conference to announce the Community Stories project. As the official photographer, I was there in a professional capacity. Julian was there as the foundation's chairman. We were back in our public roles, the careful boundaries we had established firmly in place. I moved through the event, my camera a familiar shield. I took photos of Julian at the podium, of him shaking hands with community leaders. We didn't speak. We barely made eye contact. But I was aware of him in every cell of my body, a low, steady hum beneath the surface of my professional focus. During the question and answer session, a local gossip columnist, a woman known for her sharp tongue, raised her hand. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice dripping with insinuation, "you've hired a relatively unknown photographer for such a high-profile, year-long project. What made you choose Mr. Hart over more established names?" The room went quiet. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn toward me. My face burned. It was a direct challenge, a public questioning of my merit and his motives. I could feel the speculation in the air, the whispers that would follow. I kept my camera raised, pretending to adjust the focus, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited for Julian to give a polite, corporate non-answer about supporting emerging artists. But he didn't. He looked directly at the columnist, his expression calm and unbothered. "We chose Mr. Hart," he said, his voice clear and strong, resonating through the room, "because he is the best person for the job. His portfolio speaks for itself. He has a unique ability to capture human dignity and truth, which is the entire point of this project." He paused, and his gaze swept the room before landing, just for a second, on me. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible glance, but it was filled with unwavering support. The foundation selection committee was unanimous. I was simply in agreement with their expert assessment. Next question. He had defended me. Not just me, but my work. He hadn't been defensive or evasive. He had stated my value as a fact, with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. He had faced the gossip head-on and shut it down with simple, undeniable truth. In that public moment, he had stood with me, even as we stood apart. The columnist, momentarily deflated, had no follow-up. The press conference moved on. But for me, everything had shifted. I wasn't his secret. I wasn't a liability. I was Leo Hart, the best person for the job. And he was proud of that. He was proud of me. That night, we met at my apartment. It was the first time he had been there. I had spent hours cleaning the small space, suddenly seeing it through his eyes. The worn-out sofa, the mismatched dishes, the view of a brick wall from my only window. I was nervous, worried he would see it as sad or small. He walked in, his large frame seeming to fill the entire space, and his eyes weren't critical. They were interested. He looked at the photographs I had pinned to a corkboard, the stacks of art books on my floor, the old film camera on my shelf. "This is you," he said, his voice soft with discovery. "This is where you create." He turned to me, a genuine smile on his face. I love it. He hadn't seen a lack of luxury. He had seen a life. My life. And he had accepted it, embraced it, without judgment. He had crossed the threshold not just into my apartment, but into my world, and he had done so as an equal. Later, as we sat on my lumpy sofa, sharing a pizza out of a cardboard box, I told him how much his defense of me at the press conference had meant. He took my hand, his expression serious. "Leo, there will be people who whisper, who speculate. We can't control that. All we can control is us. We know our truth. Our foundation is built on respect and honesty. Let them talk. It doesn't change what's real." He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of cheap pizza and expensive wine and something else, something solid and true. In the quiet of my small, humble apartment, I felt richer than I ever had in my life. We were building something real, something that could withstand the whispers, something meant to last. The following months settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. My work for the foundation was everything I had hoped it would be. I spent my days in community centers, homeless shelters, and after-school programs, my camera no longer a shield but a bridge. I was telling the stories Julian's foundation supported, capturing the resilience and hope he so deeply believed in. I had my own studio, a bright, airy space downtown, and my professional life was separate and fulfilling. And then there was my life with Julian. We kept our promise. Work was never discussed when we were together. Our time was our own. Sometimes we spent weekends at his quiet, sprawling house, reading by the fire or walking through the vast gardens. He would tell me stories about his father, about the challenges of building his business, about his own lonely journey to success. He opened his past to me like a treasured book. Other times, he would be at my apartment. He seemed to love the simplicity of it. We would cook together in my tiny kitchen, navigating the lack of counter space with a choreography of bumps and laughs. He would sit on my worn sofa and watch old movies with me, his arm around my shoulders, his presence a warm, solid weight against my side. He never tried to change my world, to upgrade it or improve it. He just entered it, willingly and completely. He learned the names of my neighbors and the schedule of the noisy laundromat downstairs. He belonged there as much as he belonged in his boardroom. One Saturday morning, we were in his kitchen. It had become my favorite room in his house. It was the heart of the home, a place of warmth and creation. I was making coffee, and he was standing by the glass doors, looking out at the dew-covered lawn as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I walked over and stood beside him, handing him a mug. He took it, his fingers brushing mine, a simple, familiar touch that still sent a flutter through my stomach. We stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the day begin. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "Yes," he agreed, but he wasn't looking at the sunrise anymore. He was looking at me. There was a look in his eyes I had never seen before, a deep, settled contentment, a look of peace. "I was thinking," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "The guest room at the end of the hall gets the best morning light. It would make a wonderful darkroom." I stared at him, my heart stopping for a beat. A darkroom? Here, in his house. It wasn't an offer to move in, not in a grand, possessive way. It was a gentle invitation to merge our lives more permanently. It was an offering of space, a recognition of my passion, a quiet, practical way of saying, "I want your life to be here, too." "Julian," I started, unsure what to say. He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his touch infinitely tender. "It's just a room, Leo. Just a thought. No pressure. No expectation. Just a space for you. If you want it." Tears welled in my eyes. It was always like this with him. Every step forward was an invitation, never a demand. He never used his wealth or power to push, only to open doors, and he always let me be the one to decide whether to walk through them. "I think," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "that I would like that very much." His smile was slow and radiant, as beautiful as the sunrise. He leaned in and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that was full of promises for all the mornings to come. It was a kiss that felt like arrival, like I was finally, truly home. As I stood there, wrapped in his arms, the warmth of his body seeping into mine, the scent of coffee and morning air filling my senses, I thought back to that night of the gala. I remembered the boy I was then, hiding behind his camera, lonely and yearning, terrified of being seen. It felt like a lifetime ago. Julian hadn't rescued me. He hadn't saved me from my small life. He had simply seen me, truly seen me, and given me the safe space to save myself. He had met me where I was and offered his hand, inviting me to walk beside him as an equal. The difference in our ages, in our bank accounts, those things hadn't vanished. They had simply become part of the landscape of our lives, like the trees in his garden or the brick wall outside my window. They were facts, but they were no longer barriers. Our love story wasn't a fairy tale of a prince and a pauper. It was quieter, truer than that. It was a story about two lonely souls who found each other in a crowded room. It was about building a foundation of trust and respect, brick by careful brick. It was about the steady, quiet warmth of a hand on your back, letting you know you were no longer invisible. I leaned my head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady rhythm of his heart. It was the sound of my future, the sound of a love that was built to last. It was the sound of home. And for the first time, I took a picture of it in my mind, not with a lens, but with my whole heart, knowing this was a moment I would never, ever forget. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.